Yeah, this is a big event for me today, to reflect about the fact that I have been leading this institute for 30 years. And one of the interesting observations when you're in the field of aging is it's one of those things that you study and you live. So I have enjoyed reflecting about my own aging experiences while I'm leading this institute. So what is the mission of the Institute on Aging? It's to promote through excellence in research, education, and service, and practice the well-being and health of our rapidly expanding aging population in the state and in the nation. And over the years in teaching undergraduates about the field of aging, I have often put up this figure with some commentary. So if we go back to 1900 in the US, about 4% of the population was age 65 or older. That's about 1 out of every 25 people. We are now moving into an era in which 20 to 23 to 25, depends on how far you want to go with the projections, percentage of the population are 65 and older. That means 1 out of every 4 or 5 people. In the history of humankind, this is a dramatic transformation in what we call the age distribution of the population. So it is correct to say we are the aging society, and we're not the only aging society. This is happening in many other countries around the world as well. Okay, so let's think about aging bodies. Here's some imagery for thinking about the aging of the body, and I put up this imagery to say we're very interested in the journey to old age. And so the contrast between the really snappy, shiny, well-maintained vehicle and the one that's been doing cross-country road trips, this brings to mind the observation that sometimes what we see in terms of decline in the aging body is due to the dissipations of youth. So that's an important message for younger people who are anticipating their own old age. But I also like to emphasize this observation from over 2,000 years ago from the Roman orator Cicero, who had this to say: "It is not by muscle speed or physical dexterity that great things are achieved, but by reflection, force of character, and judgment, qualities in which old age is usually superior." I think that's true, and I think it's important for us to reflect about that. And in light of the ageism that was showcased by Julie, we know that's a major problem in our contemporary world. But I like to emphasize dramatic achievements by older people through time. So here's a list of great late events. Michelangelo was creating St. Peter's Basilica in his 70s and 80s. Sophocles wrote Oedipus Rex when he was 75. Ben Franklin invented the bifocal lens when he was 78. He probably needed it. Gandhi launched the independence movement when he was 72. Helen Keller published Teacher at 75. Frank Lloyd Wright completed the Guggenheim at age 91. Arthur Rubinstein wrote My Many Years at age 92. Imogen Cunningham published her book of photography when she was in her 90s, and Mae West starred in Sextet when she was 85. So let's remember, older people are capable of great things. Okay, so here's the plan for my talk today. I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are at the Institute on Aging and showcase my wonderful colleagues there. Then I'm going to share with you some of my scientific research on the topic of psychological well-being. Whatever is that? who has it, and how does it matter for health. And then I'm going to talk about what I call the integrative science of MIDUS, which stands for Midlife in the US. And the research coming from the MIDUS study involves both good news and bad news. Okay, so here's my picture. Let me say this. These are people that I've worked with through the years at the Institute on Aging. The biggest picture down listed as 2024 was our holiday party last year in December. So what I want to say about this, under the heading of reflection, is that the best part of being director of the Institute on Aging for me is the people I work with. I love these people. We are competent, capable, hardworking, and we are fun. And we enjoy working with each other. So I just want to use this slide to express thanks to these amazing people that I work with. It's been my great gift in life to be working with all these fine people. I also want to draw attention to the fact that Jim Porter is in these pictures. Jim is back there. He's our IT guy. Jim has helped me negotiate technology across my career. And I can't imagine my life without Jim Porter. Oh, and I also want to say about this one, guess what today is? You might not know this. Today is Boss's Day. Whoever came up with such a goofy holiday? Nonetheless, it is Boss's Day, and yesterday at the end of the day, I pick up in my mailbox this magnificent card for me on Boss's Day with wonderful messages from all of these people that I work with. So I just want you to all know I'm so grateful to work with all of you, and thank you for your kind messages. Okay, so let me tell you about what I became known for as a researcher. It's my work on psychological well-being. And I put the hand there to underscore that when I was at the beginning of my career, trying to figure out what do I want to study and how do I go about it, I was very interested in people who were studying what was called successful aging. And the indicators of successful aging at that point in time were pretty much asking people questions like, are you happy? Are you satisfied with life? And I thought, well, okay, those are okay questions. I don't object to those questions. I think they tell us something important. But as an undergraduate, I had read all of the stuff that's listed under theoretical underpinnings in this figure. I had read all of this stuff from developmental psychology, clinical, existential, humanistic psychology. All of these different authors were basically writing about the upside of the human experience and what that entails. And what I did early in my career was identify points of convergence in all of these perspectives about positive human functioning. How do we figure out what that encompasses? And so the 6 things that are in the circle at the top of the figure ended up being the components of psychological well-being that I developed some research tools to try to measure in people. This is all about subjective experience. So people will answer questions about themselves that take me into how they would rate themselves on these various components of well-being that I will say a little bit more about after I draw. Oh, and I want to say here, this was the paper for which I am most known, that is most highly cited, is this paper published in 1989. And 1989 was not particularly special for me because of this paper. It was special for me because that was when my second son, Tyler, was born. So I always attach 1989 to the arrival of Tyler, not this paper. But before getting into the 6 components, I want to say that along the way, lo and behold, I found myself reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, in which the opening question is, what is the highest of all human goods? Pretty powerful question. His answer was, and I love this answer, and I've reflected about this answer so much over the course of my research career. It is activity of the soul in accord with virtue. And I'm especially influenced by the emphasis that Aristotle gave to virtue. And then he asked himself, what is the highest virtue? And this is where we get this funny word, eudaimonia. So my model of well-being is known as a eudaimonic model of well-being. Aristotle argued that the highest virtue is achieving the best that is within us. It's a kind of personal excellence. And I love those ideas. I love those ideas because, first of all, they recognize that we're all different. Each person has a different array of strengths and weaknesses. So it emphasizes individuality, but it also emphasizes the importance of becoming your best self, which I think is a laudable ideal. And it's not just about becoming your best self when you're 20 or 30. It's also about becoming your best self when you're 60 or 70 or 80. So what are these 6 components in this model of well-being? One of them is called purpose in life, and this is about finding meaning and direction in your life. And it's exemplified by this painting by Raphael of the School of Athens. Another aspect of well-being, I think this comes very close to what Aristotle was reaching for, is something I call personal growth, which is about making the most of your talents and capacities, perhaps even as you're dealing with biological aging. Then there's a dimension called environmental mastery. Do you feel that you can manage the surrounding world? And can you create a surrounding world that suits your needs and capacities? And then there's autonomy. It's a very Western aspect of what it means to be well. It's about feeling that you can march to your own drummer, that you can choose for a life pathway that might even be against conventional wisdom. Then there's self-acceptance, and I want to underscore here, this is profoundly different than another thing that psychologists study called self-esteem. This is deeper and richer because it is about recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses and learning how to work with them. And finally, the most universally endorsed aspect of what it means to be well is to have quality relationships with other people. This is about taking care of your social ties. So I have written a couple of review articles about the research that's been done with this model of well-being and the related measures. To my amazement, these measures have been translated into 40 languages. They are used all over the world. 1,900 publications have been generated to date, and they cover many, many different topics. But what I want to focus on here is, why has there been so much interest in this model? Why are people studying this model of well-being in Ethiopia and Pakistan and the Philippines, all over the world? I think it's because this model is about what I would call intellectually vital ideas and ideals that are reaching for the essential meanings of what constitutes the best within us. But I also think this model of well-being has had worldwide impact because of its scientific, what I would call relevance and versatility. We can use it to study adult development. We can link it to what's going on in work and family life. It has been extensively linked to health and biology and what's going on in the brain. Which brings me to MIDUS. This model has been, I think, an important part of what we're doing in MIDUS, which is embracing integrative science. Okay, so MIDUS stands for Midlife in the United States. The study was begun in 1995 with funding from the MacArthur Foundation. In recent years, it has been funded by the National Institute on Aging, but the original funding came from the MacArthur Foundation, and I think that's relevant to note because it was so out there in terms of the wide-ranging scope of the study. I don't think any institute within the NIH would have actually funded it. The central point of the MIDUS study in its inception was to advance knowledge of factors that promote good health and resilience. Over time, we have recruited over 11,000 Americans from across the United States into the study, and the age at baseline is from 25 to 74. That is part of my earlier emphasis to say we're interested in the journey into old age, not just what you're like when you get to be 60 or 70 or 80, but what is the journey there? Because the past matters. The past is important in shaping who you're going to be as you reach old age. So the content of MIDUS, this is a busy slide, but I want to just say a few things about it because it implicates the different scientific disciplines that sit behind integrative science. So we pay serious attention to what's called socio-demographic factors, not just your age, but your gender, your race, ethnicity, educational status, marital status, your income. Those things are powerful influences on how well-being and health unfold over time. We pay attention to genetic factors studied with twins and siblings that are in the sample. And then there's this box called life challenges, and that's basically like, what are you up against? What is happening in your life? So we have detailed assessments of the daily stress that people are confronted with, as well as their chronic stress of many different varieties and acute events. So stress exposures are a big part of what we assess in MIDUS. We pay attention to many varieties of health behaviors, and then moving down to the psychological and social factors. This is where MIDUS carved entirely new ground for a national study because there was so much psychological and social content in it that is not typically in population-based studies that tend to be orchestrated by people in demography, epidemiology, or sociology. And then we are digging in subsamples of the MIDUS investigation to what we call neurobiological mechanisms, various assessments of brain mechanisms, and a rich array of biomarkers, neuroendocrine, cardiovascular, inflammatory. So we're weaving together all of these different aspects of human experience in trying to understand unfolding profiles of mental and physical health. This is another way of thinking about, I love this Venn diagram, which basically says MIDUS doesn't privilege any single scientific discipline. It says our task is to basically weave them together because each of them tells us something important about factors that influence how well or how poorly people age. So we have a whole circle of psychosocial factors that represent many different subfields of psychology, human development. The socio-demographic factors I've already emphasized are pivotal in understanding how the life course unfolds, and then the neurobiological factors, tracking all of these things through time. So I want to come back to my model of well-being, and what did we learn when we first collected national data on these 6 different aspects of well-being at the baseline study, MIDUS 1. So what you see here are average scores on the different components of well-being among young, midlife, and older-aged adults for women. And I had no idea what to expect here before we saw these findings. But some things were immediately troubling to me. So look at the downward age trajectories for purpose in life and personal growth. That was like immediately, oh my goodness, what does that mean? And what we know from research studies that we can't always infer from what this would be called cross-sectional work, we can't always infer that that's exactly what's going to happen as people get older, because these differences might reflect period effects or cohort effects. In any case, the downward trajectories for purpose in life and personal growth were of concern to me. We see some improvements, it appears, in things like autonomy and environmental mastery for women. What about for men? So the first thing I would note is the downward trajectory on purpose in life and personal growth is there for men as well. And subsequent longitudinal research actually replicated those trajectories in saying basically, on average, people do decline on purpose in life and personal growth as they age, but those are just averages, and there's enormous variability around every age group. And so some older people don't fit this pattern. They maintain high levels of purpose in life and personal growth, and that matters dramatically for diverse health indicators. I also want to draw attention in this figure to the fact that men across these age groups rate as the lowest aspect of their well-being their positive relations with others. And we've got other studies where we looked at what we call ideal aspects of well-being. How would you rate your ideal self? And what I want to say about that is men idealize positive relationships as much as women. They just report that they have less of it. And that's an important, I think, phenomenon. Okay, so of these 6 components, an enormous amount of scientific research, not generated by me, generated by many other people, has grown up around purpose in life. It predicts how long people live. And this is carefully done epidemiological work that has all kinds of controls in the model to rule out rival interpretations. It predicts how long people live, or what the researchers would call mortality. This is a meta-analysis. This includes MIDUS data, but many other studies as well. So we have over 130,000 people in these prospective studies documenting that those with higher purpose in life have reduced risk of all-cause mortality, all varieties of causes of death, and reduced risk of cardiovascular events. Then, down in Chicago, there's something called the Rush Memory and Aging Project. It's a community-based longitudinal study running over 6 years. And the important finding here, the punchline is, high purpose in life protects against risk of Alzheimer's disease and cognitive impairment. Important findings. And then we have from the Health and Retirement Study run out of the University of Michigan. It's another big NIA-funded national longitudinal study. We have findings showing that purpose in life predicts reduced risk of myocardial infarction among adults with coronary heart disease. It predicts reduced risk of stroke. On the positive side, it predicts greater use of preventive health behaviors like cancer screenings and cholesterol tests, and it predicts decreased risk of functional decline, measured in terms of grip strength and walking speed. So there's a lot of evidence. Purpose in life, this fuzzy, subjective, inner thing. I feel I have reasons to get out of bed in the morning. I have goals to live for. Those things really matter in predicting an enormous array of health outcomes and length of life. So one of the things that I'm most proud of in the MIDUS study, given that it is funded by the taxpayers, is that we work very hard to communicate messages about our key findings to the general public. So if you go to the MIDUS website, on the home page, there's a tab for researchers and there's another tab for the general public. And the tab for the general public takes you to these newsletters, masterfully crafted by Teresa Berry. She's our maven at the Aging Institute in taking the scientific findings and making a really interesting brochure out of them. So this brochure explains to people all across America what is purpose in life and how it matters for health. And there's also focus on scientific findings about activities that nourish purpose in life, like volunteering, social connection, work engagement, and religion. We have another newsletter on the benefits of volunteering that helps us as we age. It increases well-being, happiness, improves mental functioning, maintaining a sense of purpose, and who volunteers? What we find in the data is actually that those who started doing it when they were younger are the ones who are more likely to volunteer in old age. It's a kind of life practice. And also those who maintain strong social connections are likely to volunteer. There's a million brochures I could put up here. One of the things that I think is so interesting about the MIDUS findings has to do with sleep. Sleep is so basic. It's such a basic part of life. And we measure sleep in MIDUS both subjectively, how would you rate your sleep, and objectively with something called the ActiWatch, which is something you put on like a wristwatch. It's movement sensitive, and it gives us objective measures of what's called sleep duration, how long are you not moving when you're in the bed, and sleep efficiency, how disrupted was your sleep. So we have empirical findings showing that poor sleep is linked with physical disability, obesity, pain, stress hormones, allostatic load, a summary index of high-risk biomarkers. Sleep is also made worse by depression and even child abuse that happened a long time ago. So we assess these distal things. What was your childhood like? Not just the negative stuff, also the positive stuff. What improves sleep? Having supportive friends and family, controlling your anger, and engaging in pleasant daily activities. So these are the MIDUS newsletters. They're in the exhibit room, but we're going to put them on the table when you go out. They're very interesting. You could read them at your own time. I would just encourage you to pick up a set of them or go to the MIDUS website and look at these brochures. It's about a lot of new science coming out of the study. Okay, so now I'm transitioning into something that concerns me greatly. It's about growing problems of inequality. And those are also a focus in the MIDUS study. So here's an example of some findings that came out in 2018 describing what's called declining mental health among disadvantaged Americans. So one of the things about the MIDUS study is we don't have just one longitudinal study that's moving through time. We actually have two. So there's the core study that was launched in 1995. We're now in the field collecting our fourth wave of data on the core sample, but we also have something called the refresher sample that was launched in 2012, and we just collected a second wave of data on the refresher sample. This is a study that compared data from the baseline of the core sample with the baseline of the refresher sample to assemble evidence that mental health is declining in America among disadvantaged Americans. That is, we see more negative affect, less positive affect, that's another word for emotion, less life satisfaction, reduced psychological well-being, those are my measures, among individuals of lower socioeconomic status. This is a composite of your education, your income, and sometimes your occupational status for those who are working. This is not good news. Here's another publication from MIDUS that also brought attention to growing inequality in America and explicated many of what we call the psychosocial and biological pathways. And I'm not going to go into all those details, but basically say this is also a set of findings underscoring that things are getting worse. So what is the societal context here? These are some books that came out over the course of MIDUS. Richard Reeves is a public policy analyst, and his book is database national information about something he calls dream hoarders, about how upper middle class Americans are basically living much better lives than working class Americans. The book by Anand Giridharadas, a journalist, called Winners Take All, is about actually the seamy underside of philanthropy, including the Sackler family, sitting behind the opioid crisis, the overprescription of OxyContin. But most importantly is this book called Deaths of Despair. This is straight up demography. Demographers study births and deaths in the population. And this is evidence saying that in recent times we see increased rates of death in this country nationwide due to suicide, alcoholism, and drug addictions. Okay, so that means things are not good for many people in this country. Here's an article in the New York Times by the same authors of Deaths of Despair, Case and Deaton in the New York Times. The caption is, "Without a college degree, life in America is staggeringly shorter." And here's the evidence. So I am also writing about these things, emphasizing the question, okay, I study eudaimonic well-being. Who gets to experience it? And my point with evidence is that widening inequality is diminishing the experiences of well-being among people who lack higher education. So these are trajectories of purpose in life across 3 waves of data. You can think, so these are following the same people through time. Think of wave 1 as 1995, wave 2 is 2005, wave 3 is roughly 2015. What we see is some decline in purpose in life, but the important punchline here are the differences as a function of educational status. So people with only a high school education are persistently disadvantaged across time in their levels of purpose in life. And this is personal growth. So we see downward trajectories across time, but again, people with only a high school education start at lower levels at wave 1, and they end up at lower levels at wave 3. This is about educational disadvantage implicating aspects of well-being that are now known to be strong predictors of diverse health endpoints and how long people live. This is something that should concern us all. Then we have the pandemic unfold, okay? Then we have rampant unemployment during the pandemic, lost health insurance, evictions, homelessness, hunger, food lines, systemic racism. We all watched it. We watched it unfold. The food lines. And I would just say, you know, I've been in this lovely city. I live outside of Madison, but, you know, I've been in this beautiful place for the last 40 years. That's the age of my oldest son, and he was born when I first got here. It troubles me greatly, the number of homeless, begging people we now see on the streets of Madison, Wisconsin. So I've written some about this, something I call intersecting catastrophes, meaning making in the face of the pandemic and what I call the plague of inequality. And there are many ways to approach these things. What are the emotional impacts of these experiences that for many people represent the accumulation of adversity? Relevant emotions are anger and shame. And then there are complicated questions about how do we fix these societal problems? We can't fix them just by therapy at the individual level. This is about societal structural problems that we have to approach in a different way. And so this is where I transition into something that's not so grim. So forgive me for being grim, but I can't help it. These are things that concern me greatly. I'm very interested in the role of the arts and humanities in the human experience and the degree to which they might help us activate compassion and caring. So this brings me to another direction that I have pursued in recent years, focusing on the forces that nurture realization of human potential. Education and knowledge is powerful in all of that. But I'm also so interested, and lots of other people are as well, in encounters with the arts and humanities, broadly construed. So it turns out the Mellon Foundation launched an initiative some years ago on what they called the value and effectiveness of a liberal arts education. And that was a forum in which I wrote an essay linking education in the arts and humanities to lifelong well-being and health. I've continued to work in these areas. And I want to bring into this formulation some things from great literature and people who teach great literature. So this is Harold Bloom, who spent his life teaching great literature to students at Yale. And he published this wonderful book, How to Read and Why, asking the question, why do we read? And I loved his distillations of why we read great literature: to strengthen the self and learn of its authentic interests. How about this? To clear the mind of cant, to recover our sense of the ironic, in quest of a mind more original than our own, and importantly, to prepare ourselves for change. He also, in 2005, wrote a new introduction for a republication of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, originally published in 1855. Walt Whitman is such an amazing character in American history, not just that he was a great poet, but he was helping soldiers on the battlefield during the Civil War, an amazing human being. Bloom's introduction said, "I find Leaves of Grass the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed. He is the greatest artist this nation has brought forth." And then he goes on to say, "I have murmured his long poems to myself while recovering from major surgery. There is little sentimentality in my conviction that reciting him and brooding on his celebrations and his elegies helped me to heal, hastening a little the slow pace of recovery from trauma." And then he also says, "Our new Gilded Age, with its abuse of the underclass, is little different than the one that Whitman denounced." This one is also great fun. It's a book by Alain de Botton, how Proust, the really wildly neurotic guy, Marcel Proust, did much of his writing from bed, Mama's Boy, I mean, all kinds of stuff. Nonetheless, amazing literature, and Alain de Botton helps you appreciate this. Proust can teach you how to love life today, how to take your time, how to suffer successfully, how to express your emotions, and how to open your eyes. So Marcel Proust spent time wandering around the Louvre in Paris, and he wrote this: "Great painters possess such power to open our eyes to the play of light on the end of a spoon, the fibrous softness of a tablecloth, the velvety skin of a peach or the pinkish tones of an old man's skin, qualities that can inspire our impressions of beauty. I also think the arts are critically needed as windows into societal problems, which include greed, corruption, prejudice, and exclusion. We have Dante's Inferno to learn about gluttony and greed, fraud, dishonesty, treachery, and I squeezed in here Adam Smith, the father of contemporary capitalism. Even he, in his theory of moral sentiments, wrote about the limitless appetites of the vain and insatiable. Then we have Charles Dickens in his book about the French Revolution, A Tale of Two Cities, where he's writing about the frightful moral disorder born of unspeakable suffering, intolerable oppression, and heartless indifference. A question we should be thinking about is, can the arts foster compassion and insight in our fraught world? I think they can. And it's not just the written arts, there's the visual arts, there's music, there's film. I can't go into all of it, but I would just draw attention to the famous Russian painter Kandinsky was living in Moscow in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution and had a child die of hunger. And during that period, he painted this work called Troubled. Joseph Brodsky won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1987, also from Russia, and he had this to say about the power of poetry to affect society. By failing to read or listen to poets, society dooms itself to inferior modes of articulation, those of the politician, the salesman, the charlatan. What distinguishes us from the rest of the animal kingdom is precisely the gift of speech. Poetry is not a form of entertainment, it is our evolutionary linguistic beacon. Okay, this is my last slide. I will apologize for being all over the place. That's just who I am. That's where my own journey of aging has taken me. I feel compelled to wrap my arms and head around so many different things. And I'm basically wanting to underscore that we have made great strides in the field of integrative health science. Thanks to the advances from MIDUS, what I want to say is 30,000 people around the globe are using the MIDUS data. It's a public use data set. We have over 2,200 publications basically distilled on the website in 34 different categories. So massive amounts of great science are coming out of MIDUS, and I agree with Neil, we're both biased. We're connected to MIDUS, but I do think it's one of the greatest studies of all time in terms of its scope, its high quality collection of data, and its use, its scientific use. I'm also emphasizing in this talk that widening inequality is a major societal problem and making the point that the arts can nourish our lives in profound ways, in good times and in bad, and I think they need more prominence in our science and our practice. Thank you for listening. And I want you to know that I have this little plaque on my wall in my office. I have another one, just the same design. It says, "Good morning, let the stress begin." And then there's this one, and I love it. You can't stop yourself from getting old, but you can always be immature. That's my way of saying, I think like one of the great resources in the journey of aging is a sense of humor. So I hope you have one. Thank you.